All right, let's move on and check in our quick hit segment on our favorite, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, the New York far-left congresswoman. But Hannah, she might actually be right about something for once. Let's take a listen.
What are we here to talk about today?
We are here to talk about sunscreen, specifically U.S. sunscreen, and how to fix it. Hello, everyone. This is Rep AOC, and I'm here with Charlotte Palomino.
I am a brand owner, but also a licensed esthetician. U.S. sunscreen regulations are not necessarily making us more safe or better products.
U.S. sunscreens are far behind the rest of the world. I was in South Korea earlier this year, and it is so clear how far advanced the rest of the world is on sunscreen, and we deserve better here in the U.S.
How does the FDA regulate?
FDA is different than the rest of the world in that we regulate sunscreen as a drug instead of a cosmetic. It's regulated as a drug, has far more stringent standards, far more testing, far more scientific and clinical trials that are required, which is good. We want to make sure that things are safe. However, sometimes that can add a lot of bureaucratic and costs that prevent us from getting any sunscreen filters at all.
And just for context, it has been since 1999. It was the last time that we had a new sunscreen filter in the United States.
When we compare the US standards to European standards in 2017, a Sloan Kettering study found that only half of US sunscreens met European protection standards. Here's the thing though, there is something that we can do about this. Congress has not been very aware of this issue, which is why there hasn't been a lot of momentum behind this issue. Truly, it's not too corny. Please contact your member of Congress, especially if your member of Congress sits on the Energy and Commerce Committee. They have jurisdiction over the FDA. However, any member of Congress can develop attention and draw attention to this issue. Ask them to break through some of the regulatory barriers at the FDA and fund public research so that we can all enjoy the filters that develop out of the scientific process.
Just need to make some noise about it.
Totally. I mean, I love Korean sunscreens, but I want to buy this in the US. Why do we need to import them from all over the place?
So, Brad, we bash AOC all the time. She has some truly unhinged economic ideas, but I actually tend to agree with her on a lot of things like civil liberties. When she used to be consistently anti-war before the Democratic Party beat her down, we sided alongside each other on things like that. And I agree with her here. Her recommendation is to call your congressional leaders and tell them to influence the FDA to fix this one issue. I would say get rid of the FDA altogether. I think they are a completely problematic entity, and they don't really do the American people much good. When she comes to the sunscreen issue specifically, though, she's absolutely correct. And there's something you should know that I know from my days of running a tanning salon in college, which is that there are two kinds of UV rays you want to block yourself from. One of those is UVB. It's the one you're most commonly familiar with. It's the one that can actually burn you, and it's one that has traditionally been linked more with skin cancer. Our sunscreens in the US do a pretty good job of blocking you from UVB rays. What they don't do a good job of is blocking you from UVA rays, which are a softer form of UV rays that tan you. And so you have tanning beds that can be UVA only rays, and that's why you can still get a tan even when you're wearing sunscreen, because our sunscreens don't do a good job of blocking UVA rays. But as we've learned more and more about skincare, she mentions in the video, the last time these regulations were really updated has been like over 20 years. We've learned a lot more about the harmful effects of UVA rays, and they have a lot to do with aging, which is something people like me are particularly concerned with. And they also are linked to other health issues as well. And so specifically, that's what our sunscreens aren't doing a good job of. And it's because the FDA has been very slow to approve the chemicals that other countries are using in their sunscreens to block those UVA rays.
Yeah, but it's just such a good example, right, where the government gets in the way, that creates barriers to competition, and consumers suffer. Because I read about this, and apparently it's a widely documented thing that in the US, we have shitty sunscreen, and overseas they have much better sunscreen. And why is that? It's not like Americans lack ingenuity or innovation. It's that the government makes it just about impossible. And when I was reading about this, there was one very interesting solution that I read about from a libertarian-leaning economist on Marginal Revolution, the blog, and he was saying that he thinks the FDA should adopt a policy where it designates certain foreign regulators that are equal or stricter to its own safety testing, and then allow products that have been approved, especially when we're talking not even about drugs, but like cosmetic products, basically, like sunscreen, or over-the-counter stuff. Allow them to be sold in the US with just a label on them that says approved by the EU, not the FDA or something, and give consumers the option and the information, and then let them decide for themselves, right? That like the FDA hasn't given this the green light, but you can still use it because the EU, which is just as strict or stricter, has approved it. And instead of just keeping these perfectly good and in many cases better products off the market for decades until these bureaucrats can finally get around to approving them. I mean, the reason the FDA functions like this, it's been studied extensively, is that it has a strong bias towards safetyism, because if they approve a product that turns out to be dangerous, they will be blamed for that. But if they don't approve products and people all across the country die from absorbing radiation from sun, and later get skin cancer or whatever and die, that will never be attributed and blamed on the FDA directly. It will never happen. So their incentive structures are skewed towards this extreme safetyism, and it has really harmful consequences. And so I'm glad that even people like AOC, who usually just view everything government does through these rose-colored glasses, can see it.
Well, I think I want to push back on that a little bit. Yes and no. I think they have an extreme bias towards being paid off, because they often approve products and chemicals and things that are harmful. If you look at even just some of the things that are allowed in our food system versus those that are blocked in places like the EU, I would argue that many of those should be done away with. So I think the FDA is corrupt. I think they have a corrupt approval system, and it certainly doesn't end with sunscreen. From our food to the various pharmaceuticals, to the agricultural industry and the products they are using to treat our plants. The list goes on and on. So I don't think they do a good job of keeping us safe. But I also think they block us from lots of products that could make our lives better. You know, sunscreen is one that I think has an actual health component to it. But even when you do get into things like moisturizers, the number of people I know who travel to Europe every year just to get their skincare, I'm not making this up, because you can go into your average pharmacy, they call them pharmacies, in France, in Paris and London, places like that. And they're not really pharmacies like you would think of. They are places that sell a lot of cosmetics and lotions and moisturizers, but the products are so much better overseas than what we have here. And so there are a lot of people who travel just to get those kinds of things to use in their daily routines because they're not able to access them in the United States. The FDA is something that is consistently, I think, making our lives harder. And there is a lot of bias in which companies they approve things from, which ones they don't. So I think it needs, at best, an overhaul. And I think really the market could handle most of what it does. You have reviews, you have the ability for people to share information in ways that you didn't when FDA first came about. I think it would be better to have like market boards of doctors or scientists who could approve various things in their respective industries, if anything. So I like that she's calling attention to this, but I wish she'd go a lot deeper, because I think the sunscreen issue is just tip of the iceberg with the FDA.
I know she won't ever apply this logic to like the EPA and its climate regulations or anything. Like you see this often with people who are extreme ideologues. And you know what? I think people in our ideological camp have blind spots too sometimes, but they can sometimes acknowledge one situation without seeing how it would apply to all these other things that would undercut their worldview. And so I would just love for her to apply this logic about crony capitalism or cronyism, corporatism, about regulatory capture. Apply it to some other things, AOC. Apply it to
great. It would be great if this kind of person would actually sit down and have a pleasant debate, you know, just to sort of to tease these things out, because I don't know, with people like her, you wonder how much of it is that she's just in a bubble and she's never really having anybody push back on her significantly, at least not in a friendly way. And could she change her mind on things? Could she see things in a more broad lens? Perhaps, but oftentimes they won't even sit down and have a conversation. And it really keeps us, I think, from getting further along down the pathway where we could on bipartisan issues.